Good morning, everyone. It is July the 14th, 2019, and we are starting our Genie seminar. We'll remind everyone that this is being recorded, and your participation here means that you're giving us permission to use this for public use. We hope that these types of meetings will be useful in the future for other people. To deal with the major problem that we're addressing here in our meetings. And the major problem that we are addressing is a puzzle. There's a world is full of puzzles, but from my perspective, the biggest puzzle we have can be stated as follows. It's one we've discussed a number of times. Why is it that we fill our world with fear, hate, scarcity, and war, when what we want and need is happiness, enough, love, and peace? And realistically, people who are informed are aware, I'll keep it very simple, they're aware that our world is in a very difficult situation right now. There are probably 50 wars going on at any one time. And one of our brightest minds told us a while back that it's only a matter of time before we will use his formula to create weapons with ultimate destructive power, that tribes will get these weapons, they will use them, and it'll only be a matter of time before we create human catastrophe. Those were his words, human catastrophe. And the interesting thing is that he told us what I think his most brilliant solution to this. He essentially said that we can prevent all this if we teach ourselves a newer way of thinking. He made that statement sometime after the bomb went off. It was published in the New York Times. I think it was 1956. And he said that we can, basically the way I interpret, he said we're addicted to a way of thinking where we divide the world into two categories, us and them. And that is sort of the basis. It's the root cause of why we have difficulty today. And this is really a very interesting statement, because it suggests if the root cause of most of our problems is the way we think, his solution was if we change the way we think, where we learn to cooperate, that is, we have a both and orientation, us and them, instead of us or them. Instead, if we have a new way of thinking, of processing information, we could prevent the root cause of the major problems we have. And the kind of the brilliance from my point of view of this is he's really telling us that virtually all of our problems are due to the way we think. Now, we create most of our problems. We're the ones who create nuclear weapons. We create war. Basically, we create pollution. We create starvation. Most of our addictions are something that we create by the way we think, based on a kind of the meme we said that governs sort of our evolution. The meme being a simple sentence: what's good for me and my family or my tribe, my family and my tribe for here and now, instead of what could be, that's an either or meme, me or my family or my tribe for here and now. If we could just change one sentence, what's good for my tribe and your tribe for now and the future. So here, that simple sentence would change the way we process information. So to how we can work together, what's good for you and me for now and the future, how can we work together for a mutual benefit? You notice that eliminates all the blame. There's no one that's right or wrong or being blamed and so on, as in that first meme. It's simply a way of how can we direct our energy to bring together some solutions. To put it another way is to look at it, we have a new organ, which we've called a Genie organ or a freedom organ, that has the ability to solve puzzles. The new organ we have has the ability to create stories. Our animal brain took pictures, it probably had awareness, Our earlier organisms, if we go through evolution, probably didn't even have conscious awareness. The amoeba and simpler organisms learn by trial and error. You bump into one wall and you go another direction until you make another error. So that was Einstein's basically wonderful wisdom, that we have now the ability to create stories. Remember, we've talked about the importance of imagination. With imagination, we can create multiple stories. So with that sort of introduction, that we were aware that there's a major problem. We have this big puzzle. Einstein told us we have the means, now we have the ability to solve puzzles. We've been given this wonderful organ that can solve puzzles. And it's just a matter of us being controlled now by an earlier way of thinking. So with this, I'm going to introduce two new words. We've already started with a number of different words. We had the 7 word switches, which we said if we substitute words like I think I can, it turns on our energy. And remember these 7 word switches. I think you all know them by now. I allow, saying I take responsibility for myself instead of blaming others. I could is inviting our puzzle solving organ to solve problems instead of blaming other people. And then one of the 4th word change, remember, was we substitute both and for either or. So we're changing our way of thinking, processing information in the 2 categories to now both and, that we can realize there are multiple possibilities. And then we added the 5th, which was the magical sentence. How can we work together to solve problems? What's good for all of us, working together, directing our energy rather than either or. And then we had just a couple of other word switches. We use the word energy instead of anger or fear or anxiety. We substitute the word energy. So now we say that what we're experiencing, we can use productively, whereas energy and fear basically are fight or flight, lead us to fight or flight. And then the last word switch, we said we substitute urgency for emergency. And the animal brain was forced to deal with pretty much everything with emergencies, because if they weren't prepared for difficulty, they could be eaten or whatever. So we said in today's world, we use the word urgency instead of emergency, and asked, is it high, medium, or low? And since most of what we see in a civilized world is low emergency, then we say we use our energy instead of our anxiety and fear to have dialogue and discussion where we resolve issues by trying to negotiate settlements rather than by physical confrontation. So here we realize the importance of these 7 words. And now I'm going to introduce the words which I'm sure we've discussed: a trigger word and a word switch. A trigger word and a word switch. So these are words we don't have in our dictionary. You won't find these definitions. And what we've said is that the problem that Einstein was telling us is that when we finally developed language, the language we developed was an either-or language. Before we could use imagination, this is part of our evolutionary past, before we could use imagination, we could only process information into us or them, right or wrong, good or bad. And therefore, we began to think of the world, to process the information into my tribe or your tribe. So we were pretty much inherited over a long period of time in our DNA that we need to be part of a tribe, and we see that in most animals, so on. So that brings us up to the more recent times. Only 50,000 years ago, we invented pretty much language, and that's when we began to think in terms of having trigger words. So what is a trigger word? A trigger word is a symbol. It is a symbol that signals energy, that signals behavior. So trigger words are words that call forth those things that worked in our past, in our history. What worked in our history? What worked in our history was fight or flight. What my tribe and your tribe. So I think what Einstein was telling us, we have created a language that fills ourselves, our language, our glossary of words with trigger words. So we have patriotic words. We have hundreds or thousands of patriotic words. We have hundreds of religious words. We have hundreds of, political words, different kinds of parties. So basically, our language forces us to think in terms of either or. So that's what our language mainly consists of. And Einstein is telling us if we instead create a newer language, which we're capable of doing that's not in our glossary right now, then we can change our way of thinking to go from either or to both and. What's good for my tribe and your tribe? And if we can do that, we can get rid of the root cause of all of our problems. Isn't that a fantastic idea? If our, as we've said, our major problems are the root cause is the way we think, now we can simply change the way we think one sentence, and it would solve this major problem. Why is it that we fill our world with fear, hate, scarcity, and war? And when most of our informed population tell us that it's only a matter of time. Einstein, when he made this statement, it was rather radical. Nobody listened to him, but it's been confirmed by the United Nations, by studies, by virtually every major group that's looked at the issue. When Einstein told us that the world is different as soon as we have weapons that destroy everything. So the question is, can we develop a new language? And so I'm introducing these new words into our language, a trigger word. And I've just mentioned all these trigger words that are part of our language, but can we now invent a new set of words that we don't have in our language yet? Can we solve this problem that we're headed now for disaster unless we find a way to have some kind of prevention? And I'll give you another example of a trigger word. We talked about this last week. When we invented the words that describe our genders, we said that evolution tells us that we used to be male and female energy in one organism. And when we separated, the words we used were male and female. But actually, a better word would be he, she, and she, he. So you see, the language we created divides us into us or them, right or wrong, either or. And here's a very good example that I tried to introduce last week. A more accurate language would say males and females each have estrogens and androgens. We all came from one stock. We were all hermaphrodites. We were all both male and female. But when we divided ourselves into sexes, we were still more alike than different. We still have estrogens, we still have androgens, but now we use language that separates us into us and them, where we're really both and. And until we realize we're both them, now we have tribes between masculine and feminine. And the male tribes have done one set of things, the female tribes have done other things. We've said the male tribes are more oriented towards power and females more towards love. And we begin to understand why we have conflict until we can develop, instead of a masculine society, one that's a partnership where we work together. It used to be we were together, but now we're apart. So now I'm going to I just want to tell a couple, just a brief, another example. I take organ lessons at a senior citizen center. And when I went to go to the senior citizen center, I noticed along the wall, there was a wall full of puzzles, 1,000 pieces, 2,000 pieces, very complex. And I said, why would they do this in a senior citizen center where people have some mental deficiencies and as aging individuals, as I'm beginning myself to have difficulty with my memory and so on? How would they ever put these puzzles together? And to my surprise, I saw In a couple of weeks, they took one of these puzzles and it was all put together. I couldn't do that. I don't know if you could. And I said, well, how could they do that? And I realized the answer. In this particular thing, they'd put the puzzles out on the table and people would come and sit at different corners of the table and they worked together. And when one person left, somebody else would come and sit in that chair and they would start working on the puzzle. So when you have a multiple number of people working on a puzzle, it gets done a lot faster when you have individuals doing different things with different puzzles. And that brings us to the idea of what we're doing right here. We're bringing people together, like they did in that senior citizen center, that we have a process here, a new educational learning process, which we're calling the Genie seminar. And that's one of the answers. If we can work together, we can solve puzzles, whereas individuals, it's more difficult to do that. So that's one puzzle. Now, the other thing I would like to introduce, to think about the introduction of television. What happened when we introduced TV? If you remember, if you're old enough to remember, we had basically one channel. We could listen to a Milton Berle coming broadcast from California, and everybody went to one person's house who had a television screen about 8 or 10 inches square. And it was such a wonderful thing that we could just hardly imaginable that somebody in another part of the world was in our living room. Just like, what an amazing transformation. So we looked at this one channel and that's all we had. And what do we have now? We have maybe several hundred channels. We have the ability to go to many different ways, but what usually would come on when we first started was this one channel. Now, how does this relate to something that's really important for us to recognize? We have one channel too that turns on when we have thoughts. And what turns on is the way of thinking that we learned in our history. In other words, for millions of years, over 1 billion years, we've been created a channel, which is an either or channel. And it's been part of our DNA. It's the channel that we turn on whenever we have thoughts that pop up in our mind. Remember, we said that when we had trial and error learning, what didn't work, those organisms became extinct. What did work became repeated over and over again. Those organisms survived. And then habit became DNA. It became part of our biology. It became automatic. It became habit. So the channel we have in our thoughts that are trigger words that worked in our history. They worked in the past. So what worked in the past was competing with one another for limited resources. So that's the message I hope we'll try to take a look at today. Now we have the ability to create new language or new words. And what Einstein told us, with imagination, we can create hundreds of stories. And we can change the channel. In other words, we don't have to be subject to the one channel that our DNA gives us. We have created hundreds of different stories. And the stories we create, some of them are helpful, some of them are hurtful, some of them are creative. But what makes us unique from every other organism, that makes us part of a special kind of evolution, is that we are creators. We create things because we have imagination, because we can create new stories, multiple stories. And Einstein is telling us the way we've been thinking for over 1 billion years is this one channel where we tune into the station, the TV station that worked in our past, that was filled with trigger words. But we don't have a language of word switches that direct our thinking to a higher level of thinking where we cooperate. So Einstein's basic message was, can we teach ourselves to a newer way of thinking where we cooperate with one another? In other words, what's good for my tribe and your tribe for now and the future, instead of a meme or basically the sentence that says, what's good for me and my family and my tribe for here and now. So I hope the concept will get across, because I think it's one of the most critical concepts. What I'm suggesting to you for today's meeting is to realize that what makes us different is that we now have a more accurate story of who we are and where we are today. We have a more accurate story of evolution, of where we've been and where we've come from. So we have a trajectory of our past to the present. And if that's accurate, and remember what Einstein told us, he didn't believe in the God that most people believe in. He believed in that we had a universe, a God that created a law of orderliness and predictability. In other words, he believed in the scientific method. If we understood our past to the present, the wonderful thing is we can predict the future. We are the only creature that has the ability, if we understand where we've come from and where we are today, that we can make a projection to the future. And if we understand the future, we have the ability to engage in prevention. So that's, it's a bit of a complex story. It's several pieces of the puzzle I'm trying to put together in one place here. But the key thing is, if we realize these simple words, that our language is mostly based on trigger words that bring up what worked in the past and our old stories, which no longer work. That's what Einstein told us, that we've been engaged in a win-lose kind of a society. That's what we call capitalistic democracy, a win-lose kind of confrontation. Some people win, other people lose. That until we can teach ourselves to cooperate and create a win-win society where we cooperate together, it's only a matter of time before we destroy ourselves. So that gets us back to the big puzzle. Why do we fill our world with fear, hate, scarcity, and war? And who can solve that puzzle? And I'm suggesting we are the ones who can solve that puzzle. If we work together, if we put our heads together, one individual probably cannot do it. But if a group like this can put our heads together with our creative genius, as we've been doing recently and up to now, not blaming others, but figuring, can we solve problems? And we can duplicate this kind of a new way of education by creating seminars like this all over the world. We can change the world. That's, I think, Einstein's message. Can we teach ourselves a new way of thinking? And that's, now I pass the talking stick, because I'm counting on you all to come up with the answers. Can we use our creative thinking to come up with some, not just one answer? We're facing a crossword puzzle that has maybe 1,000 pieces, like these in the Senior Citizen Center. Maybe there are 2,000 pieces. But if we get people sitting at the table and working together, we can put them together, and eventually either we can solve this puzzle, or we can allow what most of the experts are saying will happen. It's only a matter of time before somebody pushes the button and there will be no more puzzle anymore. We'll forget about the importance of money, because no matter, as Jack Canfield told me in one of our meetings, he realized after our discussion, he said, I realize that it doesn't matter how much money we have, it won't make any difference if we don't have a world to live in. Yet we still seem to worship money and our appearance and other kinds of physical things. So I'm going to step back and pass the talking stick around. I hope you will come up with some creative solutions now. We started this last week, and we started off with most people, I think, saying, I don't think I have the answer. But if we don't have the answer, then maybe we ought to just throw in the towel and say, as we said, spend our money now and enjoy it, because it's only a matter of time before the experts are telling us the end is near.
While you were speaking, one of the things which I realized is this is about education, right? And I was wondering, I was fortunate, like Basu and some others from India, who studied in a fairly good school system, went to one of the top colleges, and had educated parents, very smart friends. I was thinking, how many times did I get any praise during my school days for cooperating with my fellow friends and other students? I I got praise every time I got first. I won many competitions in schools by defeating others, not in sports. I was not good in sports, but in every other, elocution, music competitions. And whenever I came first, I was brought in the first of the class, to the envy of most of my friends, uh, and I was praised. But I was thinking, I helped a lot of folks in my school days, but I was never praised for that. So I think the entire education system, I'm not sure if it is too different here. Uh, Here, what I see is my kids get medals just for attending class. So it's like even so it's on the other side of the spectrum. But having said that, um, maybe the school system need to give some brownie points for of a student who helps others. He may not win, and the other student may not win, but cooperating and helping others is a great thing to do and learn.
Mm-hmm. Well, be a little easier on yourself, Sharat, because you don't penalize yourself for success. And in a competition, there's going to be a winner, there's going to be a loser. And I think one of the biggest problems we have today is the so-called rewarding people for showing up generation that isn't helping things. Really, I think it's leading to a lot of confusion. But that may be slightly off topic. But no, I think that what's the downside of what you're talking about? Not entering these competitions? I don't think that really attains or succeeds in anything.
No, I was not putting myself down for winning. Of course, I loved, and whenever I put effort, I won. And what I was saying is that the grading system is built, at least in those days was built. I am no longer associated with any school. Was built for those who succeed and those who fail. I remember which movie I was watching. There was this. Hussein Bolt, we know, right? He's the fastest man on earth. Now, in that movie, a protagonist was asking another protagonist, Hussein Bolt? He said, yes, but you know who came second? Who came third? So, but the system we have built, unfortunately, is preparing us for cutthroat competition. And then we blame the system, saying, so you're right, we have to come up with a new way of education where while the person who comes first, who puts the effort, gets the credit for it and the stage for it, maybe the person who doesn't come first, but at least makes 3 or 4 people improve their life or improve the way they live their life, or improve their education, improve anything in their quality of life, he also gets a recognition. Now, of course, there is a lot of recognition for them outside, the government agencies and all those things. Non-profits get recognized for good work. But then even the education system needs to do it, because we are just creating, this system where the success is what speaks.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, Shred, and I agree with it. And I hear you, Brad, that it's not a matter of, you shouldn't enter a competition. But the system, a system is set up in such a way that, the rules are there are winners and losers. That doesn't make I agree, it doesn't make the winners bad, but the outcome of that is defined by the system. The system defines that there's one best, strongest, fastest, whatever, and a system that recognizes success or rewards success as teamwork or cooperative accomplishment, or selfless involvement, or doing for the group or doing for the team, becomes maybe what may be more rewarded. I'm not sure. I don't know. You could create a completely communist undertaking, which I don't think is the point. But I do think, if you want any way to control the outcome of the game, the greatest way to have control over outcome of the game is to be the one who writes the rules. Then you can have anybody win who you want to win. Whatever you choose to value, you can write the rules in such a way that that's what is rewarded. And I think historically, because we have valued superiority, strength, speed, power, most of our games and most of our society is kind of developed to reward those things without rewarding or engendering, you know, the either or the both and mentality. You know, this is specifically not a both and. It's either you win or you lose, no matter how much we praise people for effort. I also just wanted to change the channel for one thing. That I agree with you, Dad. You know, Einstein's message was, you know, we need, you know, create a new way of thinking. But I think the world that he lived in and the species that he either saved or doomed came about not because of a change, not because of any global change way of thinking, but he was able to change the way he thought about, you know, mathematics and science and light and energy. And it's taken decades for people to start to understand what he was talking about and to advance that. And if he went about his revolution the way we're going about ours, we never would have, you know, the Germans would have, you know, blown us up a long time ago if we were trying to get it, if he was trying to get everyone to understand his view of physics and that light, you know, was bendable or movable and that energy and matter are transferable. You know, if he had chosen that method to change the way of thinking, the way people see reality, we would have been blown up a long time ago, which goes to, I think, Abi's prior discussions, that there's some degree of practicality and urgency that, you know, that we have to respond to. So I think Einstein's idea, the notion is correct. He certainly didn't employ that method in his own intellectual revolution. He just did it himself. So anyway, that's all.
Well,
I love it when you're dystopian.
I think in the school system, they changed that. And they haven't exchanged one for the other, I don't think, but they have added teamwork and cooperation. It's much less somebody lecturing. It has more about a group of kids, usually maybe 4 kids sitting around a table, who work together to solve a problem. I don't think that does away with the smartest kid in the class. He'll probably be the valedictorian, but it is a different model that's happening, at least in East Hartford. They also had a woman, I'm not sure what it was called, but she went around to each class and they talked about problem solving. And I sat in on one, and there was a problem where you drop a raw egg into a waste can from a certain distance, and you had to figure out a way to have the egg go into the waste can without breaking. And they had various kinds of straws and supplies that you had to figure out how to drop this egg and not have it break. And the groups that did that won the prize or excelled or whatever. Anyway, I was watching this one group, and there was one kid who was obviously the smartest in the group, kind of a nerdy looking kid. And he ended up taking over. At the beginning, everybody was talking about what they could do, but he sort of pushed everybody aside and he figured it out. And, you know, at whatever the time was, he dropped the egg in the wastebasket and it didn't break. And he was all smiles and felt good, but he didn't win the prize. I mean, the object was to cooperatively figure out how to do this. And he didn't do that. All he did was see that the egg didn't break. I don't know if he remembers it. He's probably, you know, still one of the first kids in the class. But, you know, when you say you were never, Sharon, when you never rewarded for cooperation, I think in this class, the kids who worked together were rewarded for cooperation. And I don't know that that's going to replace the other system, or if you got 100 on a test, you're going to beat the one who got 80. But it does give a different model and an alternative way of looking at things. And I think that's probably the best we can hope for in terms of change, is to show both models and show kids that there are 2 ways to win. One, win together, and one, push everybody out and, you know, do your thing. So I guess it's that, you know, that either or. And I think that's I think in education, and I don't know, have to ask Sue, what's the newest model in education? And they keep changing. So, but offering that as an alternative, I think is a very positive thing. And there's some kids who will remember it, and some kids who might become teachers who will go on to teach it if they found it effective. But it's not a quick fix.
I grew up in elementary school in the 40s, and report cards at the end of the year, or the end of the semester, I should say, gave you the different evaluations of A, B's, and C's in the different subjects. But always at the end of the report card, there was a checklist. And I remember two things specifically from that checklist as a result of our conversation today. One was works well with others, and there was a checkbox, yes or no, that the teacher would fill in. And the other one is helpful to others. So that idea isn't totally foreign to our school system. Maybe it's changed, of course, since I've been a kid at school, but certainly these ideas go way back, or maybe it was just in the system that I was in. But those things were considered important when I was young, working well with others and two heads are better than one and all that sort of thing. I think nobody knows everything about anything. It's one of the reasons why when we meet in groups like this, there are so many people who have more information about other subjects than you do. But the point of the matter is that all of these ideas together, as Don just pointed out, create the strength. But the strength that has always been there has been working well with others and is helpful to others. I just think that we're going back to some old ideas.
Well, I remember that very well. And on my report card, seriously, I used to, I think they summarized that on my report card, there was a checkbox for citizenship. Yeah. And a gradation on citizenship, you know, and I had to have that explained to me exactly what that entailed. And, you know, but I do remember. I think I don't think you could get that through in school systems today. I think that would immediately be suspect by the PC prism that everything moves through in schools today.
Now, I'm trying to think, you know, the president we have elected, you know, how well does he work with others? and look where he got to. And
you really want to go there? You know what, you're opening it up here.
But I agree.
Oh, you won't start you.
But I think that although I think we kind of see it as a pleasantry or a nicety, and we have recognized it for a long time. But it's not, you know, if you look at, in some way, if you take a pessimistic view of our education system, it's a system of sorting. It may be some degree of educating everyone, but it functions primarily to expose people to similar help and then sort out the ones who do well. And then those people who are sorted at the top of the class are selected. So, you know, you think of the politicians or the big Wall Street people, are those people really selected for citizenship or for working with others, or are they selected because they were sorted, not necessarily educated to be what they are, but they're sorted because they have certain characteristics that are functional in some future capitalistic realm, like politics or like making money, or like war. I agree with Pearl. I think these characteristics have been around for a long time, but in groups they haven't been used in a way to rise to the top of the group or to lead the group. I don't think. I think the other qualities, the more destructive, you know, primal old brain qualities, are the ones that are used to be sorted and then advance to the top of the group and lead the tribe.
I remember that checklist too, and I don't remember ever reading it. All my parents were interested in was the part that had the letters. And that's where I got a quarter. If I got a E at that time was excellent. And I didn't get anything if I got a G, which was, I think, the next down, which was good. So it certainly wasn't emphasized, that part of it. And, you know, I remember glancing at it. I don't remember what any checkoff that I ever got because it wasn't important in my family. So, you know, you're right. It was there, but I'm not sure who read it.
I read it because I was so desperate to find anything good in the report card that I could. I'm half serious. I mean, I remember when they replaced F with E. They used, in our report card system, they used E. And in the grading system, I think if you got an E, it meant you were suited to life as a houseplant or something. It was not a good thing. And it's funny because I look back and in my own, seriously, in my educational career, I was sent to a pricey, pretentious New York City private school. It was the worst educational experience I had in my life. And ironically, when I went to and finished high school in a public school system in New Hampshire, it was the best. It was a school that encouraged growth, participation, communication in all forms. It wasn't this whip and chair memorization process that the private school was so fond of. The private school was far more fond of its identity and its stature than it was in anything really that I felt was useful as a student. Don, I want to just jump right back to, I think, the question that you asked at the outset. And if I understood your question correctly for us today, it was, what causes what we're doing here to proliferate as effectively and quickly as we can? Because you indicate that we're all going to die within 48 hours, the way things are going. And no, I'm being facetious, but I understand that to be the premise. And I think that we've already created the machine that can do that. Because I think the fastest, most effective way, and I wonder what you think of this, Josephine, is simply the digital communication capability of the internet, which is really where everybody is today and how to reach people quickly and effectively. So we have this machine that you've created. The question is, do we turn the key and see if it runs and see how effectively it can promulgate what we're doing here to the vast number of recipients? Is it time to simply do that? Or are we doing that right now?
I think this call is a microcosm of what's going to happen when this goes wider. How do you get people to accept some of the tenets of the philosophy, and how does it fit within their current way of thinking? If the notion, I mean, listen to you know, the comments. We're trained as a species to be very competitive, individualistic, and for our own tribe, whether it be our families, our neighborhood, our country, you know, the classroom, you know, the country's competing with each other. It just grows. It's just a bigger way of being individualistic. So even using the internet to spread the message, it's like, how do you get people to adopt the ideas? And I think that's what we struggle with even on this call. You know, you have, you know, I think Abhi made a good point. You have the most selfish person in the world who's risen to that, you know, to that level. How do you fight that? How do you combat that notion of, you know, egalitarian when you see selfishness being rewarded?
Well,
Oh, Casey, I'm sorry, I said Abhi.
yeah, no, that's okay. To get attributed to something from you, Josephine, is an honor. And for me being selfish, I'll take it. Pacey who?
No, I didn't mean Pacey was selfish. I thought he made a good comment about our current leadership.
Damn. Uh, so I think I kind of look at this. I mean, I think the way I'm saying this, I think, is part of illustrative of some of the problem, and that is that you sort of assume there is some sort of consensus on what the past is and how it might lead us to the future. What I've seen is where I'm kind of hearing on one hand, a lot of people believe that our society is always compensating the individual over the team. But when I see the most successful companies, for example, Google, and I can remember many years ago was FedEx, it's those ones that actually do work together that prosper, greatly prosper. They're considered the unicorns. Why are they successful is because I think they have adopted a model that, in my opinion, is more cooperative. It's not, don't ask me a question, just get back to the line and do what I told you to do or you're fired. Those companies that maintain that view of a working environment compete against ones that say, well, you probably have some good skills and experience. Tell us how you think the factory should run, or tell us how you think this line should run. I think that over the course of time, those companies have destroyed the ones that have been autocratic. And as a result, the level of consumption, the level of wealth that's been created, over the last 100 years has dwarfed anything that happened before that. So I think there is precedent that when people do things, it is rewarded. It might not be rewarded as formally in a school system, but I think in the marketplace, it is rewarded. And those are the kind of systems I think are probably most relevant, because that's how people will, how you make your living, greatly inform, how you work together as a society. And I also think that, the idea of, I know Donald Trump gets beat up a lot in these meetings, but one of the reasons he is so popular is, rather than everybody just thinking, oh, he's terrible, he's actually addressing issues that are kind of systemic, chronic issues that nobody has touched. And there's a group of people who think, just sort of saying it's untouchable, it's just not convincing. I mean, I saw, there's the article in Time, or the cover of Time, when, there was this grumpy old Trump looking at this 4-year-old who was crying his eyes out, and, kind of saying that, oh, this mean old man is, sweeping up the kids and throwing them in detention camps. What never gets reported, and I think, what is on people's mind, is that there is a problem. And the default of just let's not do anything, just let the borders be porous because we can't agree. There's a lot of people who take offense, that don't agree with that. They just say that, well, just because it's portrayed as ugly and terrible, it's not enough justification just to say, well, we can just continually ignore it. So why am I bringing this up? There does get to the point where you sort of say, well, you kind of look at the past and you can inform with the present. There's a huge problem that people really can't agree on what the relevance of the past is and how it is informing us. And I think that problem is getting worse, not better. With that one group feels that they're the right, they have the right answer, and everybody else is stupid and wrong, and the other group has exactly the same opinion. And there's a less ability to have that common ground. And that idea of how do you persuade and influence other people becomes really, really relevant, especially if you think that you're going to look at the past to inform the future. Because right now I think the mechanisms that are using are not that persuasive, and that idea that you can dig down and understand the past to figure out the trajectory of the future, is more difficult to do now than I think it has been in most of my life.
Hey, Obi, you of all the examples you could have given of systemic problems that the president is addressing, I wonder why you chose this point, the Time article or Time picture that you're saying, because yes, I agree there is a problem, and but then the solution that was brought in is so ghastly. It is beyond belief. That a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or a 6-month-old is being, can you imagine? You're a father yourself.
Yeah.
It is unimaginable. And then Trump himself realized it. You know, somebody might, so it's not that Trump is sitting in White House and he's saying, let me take a vengeance against these kids. He's not sitting doing that. It's just that somebody pushed a paper to him and said, this is how we'll handle it. And he might not have thought through it. So I'm giving that benefit of doubt. But then the solution that you bring to a problem, especially, it cannot be such inhumane, you know, that nobody, even the person who took that decision, could justify it. Now, I agree that lot of issues is being addressed. And, you know, the funny thing is, my neighbor the other day, in an argument, I don't know to give the complete details, and he got pissed off with me because I was just, you know, I thought it was not an urgent issue and he thought it was an emergency for him. So he said, oh my God, I am not Obama, I am Trump. And I was like, I started laughing. I said, oh my God, where is this going? So your point is right. You're precisely right that many people think that he is addressing. But the question is, how is he addressing? Are all those addressing in the right direction? That's
Well,
where
this is, I'm going to sort of defend, you know, I'm going to defend a way of looking at this, which I think a lot of people in the country actually do look at it.
yeah.
I think the way that the immigration thing is learned is that, you know, the default has been don't do anything. And there's non-agreement. And I think, you know, from my perspective, what Trump is saying is, look, if we can't agree, rather than having you be the default, I'm going to choose my default, which is going to be tight borders. And if we can't agree, then we'll just, rather than having porous, we'll just be tight. And if you can agree, we'll come up to something that's humane. But the idea of just saying, you don't want to agree with me and the status quo is okay, he said, well, I'm just going to have the status quo be on the other side of the extreme rather than the open side. So I think it's kind of a pressure point just to say, I'm willing to agree. I think we're willing to compromise. If your line is you can't compromise, the status quo is going to be on the other side rather than the current side. And it sort of forces. I think it's more likely to force a compromise. So that idea of you can't agree, man, if I look at those articles in Time, I never see anything that says there's a problem with porous borders. I see there's this old bastard who's throwing babies in jail. And, you know, I think a lot of people look at that and say, that's just not a credible media. You know, there's no recognition that there is an issue outside of there's this mean old bastard.
That's because it's all political.
And a lot of people say, well, it's all true.
They can say that.
Yeah.
It's so easy.
That's fine.
It's very easy to get into a dialogue, again, about right or wrong, you know, which is seemingly where we're headed to in this meeting, you know, who's right and who's wrong. And
I'm actually not going there, Dan.
I think I'm speaking.
Sure.
One of the problems you see is we get so eager to speak and we get so hot and trying to listen. Again, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So the issue, you know, I think it was brought up earlier, can we find a solution to the problems rather than looking and see who's right or wrong? And can we find a system where we can work together? But it's easy because part of the message, at least it seems to me, is that we are addicted to this way of processing information to look for who's right or who's wrong. And that's why it's so hard to get over that addiction, because we're so eager to find out a right or wrong and be using our energy, which is for the most part not coming up with a solution. No, so I think when we find a better way, and that somehow, when we put our heads together to look for a better way, but when we get into this crosstalk in a meeting, we're getting away from the basic method of education that works in the Genie seminar. That is, how can we work together and not to find out who's right or who's wrong? That's a worthwhile thing to discuss, but it's not very productive in this kind of meeting.
Well, I don't feel that that's the point that Avi brought up.
Yes.
I think your point is well taken, and I think it's up to the Democrats in this case to provide an alternative, and that's one of my unhappinesses with the Democrats, because they haven't provided an alternative. I think, I've thought of different ways, maybe individuals adopting families or communities saying we're willing to bring in so many families, but just criticizing, and I think that's often what people do, just criticizing the other side really doesn't get you very far unless you have something to say instead of. What would we do instead of? And I think that is very much the point of the Genie seminars, to try to get people to do something, provide an alternative or say something positive rather than just sit back and criticize. And it's certainly easy to criticize with some of the stuff that's coming out about the borders, this child and parent, picture drowned, and the babies and the crowded conditions. But that really doesn't, I don't think that really helps.
Well, it doesn't. And where we get totally off the track is where people start saying crazy inflammatory things like we're running concentration camps and all the rest of it. That's where we get completely off the track, and that's a very disingenuous thing. But, to get back to what I was saying before, I don't know, maybe there's a parallel here, because we have what Einstein said decades and decades ago, and nothing has happened, nothing has transpired until our organization started to gain some ground. And you got the border crisis, which I don't know how many administrations that we had that have done nothing for. So there's a parallel, and we're trying to do something. So, and trying to reach people with it.
Yeah, can I say one thing, Obi, before you jump in? So this is one of those rare cases, Don, where actually I agree with Obi. So, but he was not trying to go for right or wrong. He was just trying to put the other person's point of, like, what is the other side thinking. The main thing here is it's the decisions, right? At the end of the day, what we are talking about is, why do we fill our life with fear, hate, scarcity? So the decision to take a 6-month-old child away from the parent is because I hate what the parent is doing, like somebody has taken a decision. So that is very, very relevant. It's just that I was mainly pointing out to only one thing, obvious, of all the good things that Donald Trump has done, and of course he has done good things. He has probably the highest approval rating. Why did you choose that particular instance? Was my only you were saying he did something good, and you chose the one thing which he himself took back because he could not live with what actually happened when he agreed with his team. So because he's himself a father, and he knows what a father goes through or a parent goes through. There is this video, again, I understand the bias and all those things, but there is this video of a mother who was returned her child, her 2-year-old son, after probably I don't know how many months of segregation, and the child would cry every night for next 2 months. Just in the middle of the night, the child would wake up and say, "Mom, please don't go away." That's the impact on the it's just what Russians did in Afghanistan. They completely created a generation of terrorists by taking over that country. And what America did in Afghanistan, Russians did in Afghanistan, what Pakistan did in Afghanistan. And now you have a country full of terrorists back in late 90s, and then the entire world says there are terrorists there. Of course, you put that country through hell for 15-20 years. So what will you get? The same thing happened in Africa, in Iraq. So what my point is, what you're saying, Don, is when we fill our world with fear, scarcity, hate, especially hate, or especially discrimination against others, we reap what we sow, and that is where we are going. So just because we don't have a solution doesn't mean we take the worst solution and then try to justify it. And people make mistakes. I understand that. Sorry, Abhi, please.
No, that's okay. That's Yeah, my point, I'm not really here to defend Trump. I think the point that was really making is this idea that, you can use the past to inform the present. I mean, that's kind of the strategy that we're going on, and I'm just that's not quite so clear. And if you study that, is that influential? Is it influential to villainize Trump? And I mean, I think that we have what I believe a very liberal leaning media, and not everybody is in sync with this liberal leaning media, and I think that's one of the reasons. Recognizing that will help inform why someone who seems to be so unpopular seems to be so popular. In kind of understanding that dynamic, that is that really being persuasive? Is just sort of saying you're terrible, you're terrible. I think that's kind of more my point. And there's a lot. I think this idea that you just look at the past and you can get a straight trajectory out. That's not quite so automatic to me. So I'll leave it there.
So as the topic is that why we fill our world with fear and hate instead of love and happiness. So what a study has found is that the media organizations, whether it's print or TV, they have also found that fear and hate sales, the sales of advertisement, everything is much better. Fear and hate is what actually people want to listen more than any happy news. So if you have a channel which only shows happy news, it will not work. So it's actually
those people are very poor. Those people who make that channel.
Actually, bingo, Basu. So it aligns with what you were saying, right, Don? So if we as human beings, in a collaborative effort, educate ourselves to try to learn and think about positive things and work towards positive things, and not open our eyes to anything negative, then probably media which is catering to its commercial interest is to cater to its audience, will also slowly but steadily change. But if wherever they show a man taking a child away from his parent and everybody is watching, they will show more of it. Maybe just 5 such incidents happen.
Well, I think all this is a very potent and important discussion from my perspective. I think you're all on the track. Fear, hate, scarcity, and war, when I tried to introduce at the beginning of the meeting, these were the adaptive ways our ancestors had to survive. These were not, what we inherit is not what's the negative kind of things. What we inherit are trigger words, the words that will lead us to think that did work in the past. So it was necessary that we have fear and hate. We had to hate the other tribe that was coming to take our children and take our furs and whatever, and take our cave away from us. And we had to be at war, and if we weren't prepared to become part of our tribe and kill other people in the other tribe, we would not have survived, would have become extinct. So fear, hate, scarcity, and war, they in fact were the adaptive behaviors for our ancestors. And when our ancestors created language, they created words that supported that. And now what Einstein, his brilliance, is telling us, now that we have weapons that destroy both sides now, it's not that you kill all the other side, but we live in a different world today. We have evolved. That's the power of evolution. What was working in the past does not work today anymore. If we have weapons that kill everything, instead of kill a few bits, we're not just pruning the bush anymore so that the stronger parts come back better the next year. We're killing the whole bush. And that was Einstein's message, until we realize that we have to instead not think of how we can win and lose, that we have to think in terms of what can we do to cooperate and work together. That's what love is. Unconditional love is working together for the benefit of the greater whole. And it gets back to a more complex kind of a thing. Masculine energy was power. We said power was blind without love. Power can be used to create war, or it can be used to create peace. And it creates both. It creates, so we're creating war, and yeah, well, sure, we want peace too, but do we realize that we have to find a way to change this way of thinking? How can we learn to work for the benefit of everybody, not just for our family? This group, to me, when I see how we are very resistant to change. We're caught up in the old way. The guy who won the swimming contest, who won all
Yeah.
the medals, he beat somebody by maybe 4 thousandths of a second. Means the other guy, the second guy, was almost as fast as he was. And the third guy was maybe almost as fast as the first two guys were. And what the person who came out best, he found some ways that other people could use so that later they could get better. So we've all improved together. So why not instead have a celebration where if number 1, 2, and 3 have a party together and they share their competence, rather than the winner gets all, you see, and the loser is forgotten. So he's not third, he's the turd. He's a turd instead of third. So he's just forgotten. But that's what we don't understand. We have created an educational system.
Yep.
As it was brought out at the very beginning. The educational system is based on the old way of thinking, only we're using symbols. Today, money is the symbol of power. With money, that's power. You can't buy love with money. You can buy somebody's affection, they will feign affection, but it may not be true love. So somehow when the sexes were divided, the males became dominant. We have a masculine-oriented society now. Women, we talked about that women have their clitoris removed and they're covered with clothes and so on, but it goes much, the shallower part of that, women were not permitted to have an education. If there was an education, it was only for men. Women could not pray to God in the right way. Only men could be head of the religious organizations. We still have that today. Women are excluded. When we created our forefathers, who we thought were so brilliant, they excluded women from votes. Women haven't been able to vote. So we're not willing to accept, males have basically dominated society. And until we can come back to how can we work together, and I think that's what Brad was trying to bring up as well. What in this meeting can we do to figure out how to make our power, we have 9 people here now, and we have as many as 11 when everybody's here. How can 11 people multiply their power so it's the equivalent of 100 power instead of 10 times 1 or 10 times 2 times 2? When you have a group of people together, the analogy I like to think of, I don't know if this makes sense to you, if you take a snowball on a mountain, then you let it roll down the hill, as if you can get enough impetus going for the snowball to roll down the hill, it gets bigger and bigger. By the time it gets down to the bottom, it's accumulated. It's a huge thing now because you've accumulated over a period of time. You've added everybody's power together. Can we do that in these meetings together? Einstein didn't have that when he talked about, Einstein did spend the last 10 years of his life advocating for peace. That was the main direction of his energy in the last 10 years of his life. He said, how can we, that he was, that was, and it basically said his God was the God of common sense, not common sense, universal sense. It was the God of universal sense. It was that if we can understand the way nature works, what I guess he called the law of orderliness and predictability. If we can understand that, that's why we can predict the future. So if we can understand, instead of the story we've been telling ourselves, the story we created was of a God who created everything 6,000 years ago. And if you pray and say nice things like they do, we talked about the Hawaiian incident. The Hawaiian incident was when people got into a jam, what they did was they prayed. They say, I will give up my wealth if you'll just stop the bomb. But as soon as it stopped, they went back to, I got to make more money now. So the idea that I'm trying to convey is that money, you see, is simply an expression of the old way of thinking. It is a symbol now for the old way of thinking, and somehow we've got to find that there's something more important than that. But we're addicted. Our education just follows the same path that our ancestors it was a male-oriented education. It was a top-down education. You mentioned the idea of Brad, your education. It was, you regurgitate what the teacher tells you. And as Marilyn was saying, we're changing now. The school system is having kids work together as in cooperation. What we're doing now, we have a new method of education now that we're adopting in the primary school system. This is a means of education we have that we've never had before, Genie seminars. We have the ability to bring people together in large number. We're just one group. And if we can be like that snowball that starts up at the top of the hill, and we can get enough momentum that we can start groups like this all over the world where people start sharing their ideas, we can solve. If there's 1,000 pieces of the puzzle we have to solve, it's not just one piece. It's not just, as we can point it out, it's not just immigration. What we've got creating nuclear weapons, we have pollution, we have addictions, we have scarcity, and so on. These are all pieces of the puzzle that we have to solve one at a time. But until we can get over this addiction we have, my way is the only way. And yet when we get together, as we started in our early meetings, we started off basically talking about the terrible leaders and the terrible politics and everything. And gradually we have evolved in this group to more and more begin to ask ourselves the question, the magical sentence question, that fourth word change. What can we do? How can we direct our energy to work together to come up with a positive solution? And I think that's the critical area. We're doing that now, and I think we're doing great. We're coming along here, but the fact is, from my point of view, we're still pretty well addicted to the old way of thinking. We're still addicted to those trigger words. There's part of our language we don't have words like a mentogynous. We have to realize that we have the ability to create our future now. But that's what evolution is about. It's gone from being dependent on fate and circumstances and so on to now we have a Genie organ that can create multiple stories, and we can change the channel. The old channel is the one that comes up automatically that says what's good for me and my family and my tribe. We're addicted to that channel, but we've created 300 channels. You go to your television set now, you can turn to the comedy channel, you can turn to the war channel, where you can, if you're a male, you can watch war pictures where you know what happens in war pictures. There's always the good guy is in trouble and at the end he wins. Or you can be a woman, you can look at romantic stories where the love is in danger, there's great danger, but at the last minute something happens and the two people realize they really love one another. And you can predict the end in every one of those stories. But so we create all kinds of channels, and people go to the channels that are most comfortable for them. But what we're learning is that we've got to get out of our comfort zone. Our comfort zone is what's good for me and my family and my tribe. But that's not going to get it to there. We somehow it's the crises that gets us to change. It's where we have a little pain, anxiety, where we have a little anxiety and we have fear. So we've used those words to avoid them instead of using the word energy. Energy is saying we've got the energy to do something, to take action. The idea that creativity comes from work. It doesn't come automatically. So before you get creativity, you have perspiration precedes inspiration. So we've got to we got to educate ourselves to think in a different way before we can. But it's hard to do that. We're still very much caught up in our own addiction, and that we don't realize. My area of expertise in my lifetime was in the addictions. And one of the things I learned that one of the characteristics of the addiction is the addict always thinks that he needs his addiction. I've got to have my heroin. Other people can look at him and say, heroin isn't very good for you. You can look at it and say, alcohol, we can see alcohol in moderation may be fine. Most things in moderation, but if you use alcohol in excess, you get into big trouble. Pearl, would you like to share your difficulty situation that just came up? Would you rather not? Are you there, Pearl? Can you unmute? Would you?
I will if you feel it will be helpful.
Yeah, why don't you just share what you had a terrible experience lately. Why don't you just share it?
Well, my dog married 20 years ago or so a man who had drug and alcohol problems long before he had a drug addiction, which started on opioids because of his back problems. Excuse me. And he got her into opioids. And just recently, and I don't know all the facts because, you can't believe everything that you're told. But supposedly he overdosed on heroin. And by the way, Don, I haven't had a chance to speak to you, but he succumbed last night. He passed on last night about 11 o'clock. They had him in a when they got him filled because he overdosed. I think it was Thursday night, and rushed him to the hospital. And they put him on. They put him on life support right away, and they've been, going back and forth deciding whether or not they should pull the plug. And they were trying to test him to see if there was any active brain waves and so forth, and there didn't seem to be. So that's the only information I have, but I can tell you that you just mentioned how we thought with the animal brain and the addiction, and that you don't understand. I need this drug. I need to feel better. I need to get rid of the pain. And it's exactly that. It was whenever we said something or warned him, it was always, well, you don't know what I'm going through. If you knew what I was going through, you would take these medications as well. And that is the story of addiction. We have just lived it now. My daughter's left with two sons who are, fairly older. One is in his early 20s, one is late teens. We'll see what happens from here on in. But it takes the whole family down. There's no way you can separate the weakest link from what the family is going through. It's very, very difficult to. And that's all I have to say at the moment.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. But it is such a wonderful example. It's a painful situation, but I thank you for sharing it because it helps us understand that sometimes we have to have pain to learn things. And your point that, the weakest link in the chain, obviously, this is not just something that hurts your daughter, but it hurts everybody in the family, everybody involved. It is a chain reaction. The weakest link, creates the problem. But true of every addiction that I've learned and I've worked with in my career, that the person, whatever the addiction is, they really believe they have the right answer. And no matter how much you persuade them, that's why it's so difficult to deal with heroin addicts and alcohol addicts and so on. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that we have an addiction to the way we think. Einstein was saying we're addicted to this way of either we're thinking, where we want to say, my way is the right way. And it's so difficult. And I guess what I feel so good about this group is that I think we're getting through that addiction. I've gone through it myself. I'm so addicted to myself, but we all have that idea that my way is the right way, and that's the reason we have confrontation and wars and so on. We're still dealing with things the way we dealt with them in history, which is what we had to, because that's the way the world was. But in today's world, we can learn to work together and find solutions instead of continue to be in a win-lose confrontation where power is the answer. You have to have bigger weapons, bigger muscles, and you have to have more money than anybody else. That somehow it's a matter, love is a word that says, can we cooperate together? Can we work together? So thank you for sharing that, and I hope it's something we can learn from it and not just have the pain of having the loss of someone. We're well over the time, but any last comments before we end our meeting?
One thing, thank you for sharing, Pearl. I'm sorry for your pain and your loss. That sounds terrible. Second, it kind of pains me to agree strongly with Abhi. I think what Abhi was pointing out is maybe part of where the solution is that I don't think he was pointing out that, one's right and one's wrong. I think he was pointing out is that, neither solution is really better than the other. They're both polarizing and both problematic. And I think he's pointing out that it may be somewhat arbitrary which side of the fence you end up subscribing to, because if you're on either side of the fence, you're kind of missing the point. The point is that there's a problem and that's the border, immigration, issue, which is long and complex. And I think it relates to what you were talking about earlier in terms of triggers. I think, the media and politicians know that triggers, push us into action or push us into, biased perspective. And so everyone is working to push our triggers. I think that's that's one of the point. And maybe the first part of having an addiction is recognizing it. And I think, what I'll be pointing out, potentially, I'm not sure if I give him all this credit, but I guess I have to.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take it.
Is that, if you look at a problem like borders and immigration, the first thing you have to do is recognize the triggers, is recognize that, what Trump is terrible is maybe as much of a trigger as what's happened in the past. If you really look at the underlying problem, and how do you take the triggers out of the equation and just look at the issue in a frame of mind that we choose to, not a reactive frame of mind because someone has pushed our righteous trigger or our financial trigger or our pain trigger. So I think the ability to walk in and to have discourse about these issues, maybe the first part of doing that is to recognize what the triggers are as a way of trying to move them to the side and trying to see it and respond to it and dialogue in a different way, and maybe not get caught up in who's right or wrong.
Today is one of those days, Pacey, where both of us will have to agree with Obi. So 14th of July, right? We have to remember this day. So Obi, one of the statements that you said is you do not know if history is an accurate, it helps us to accurately predict the future. And I would tend to agree with it because there are always outliers. I don't think there is any example in history, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think there is any example in history which had the same ghastly effect of what Hitler did during the Second World War. Now, there were wars before that. There were mass killings before that. But what Hitler chose to do with Jews in concentration camps, I am not aware of any historical reference which would have predicted. Otherwise, the leaders in Europe were not, they were, selfish, but they were not so foolish that they would have, pre-war, what is it called, agreements with Hitler. England had United Kingdom had, agreements with Germany, and even Russia had agreements with Germany. So for no war kind of thing. So it's just that there are always outliers, and that is where I think as a group, what we are doing, and hopefully we will expand to a larger group, is we need to come up with a newer way of thinking. And that is where Einstein not only gave the problem statement, he also gave the solution, that the significant problems we face today cannot be resolved at the same level of thinking that we were at when we created them. And I think this is the program where we do this.
Well, one thing I think we can all agree on today, that is that we have not solved the problem yet. We still have some more work to do. And I don't know if we can solve it in another meeting or two. It's a big problem. It's been going on for billions of years. And we're just here at this little blink of an eye in time. And but I think we're making some headway at any rate. So thank you for sharing and for your participation.
I agree that Obi is the problem.
The best way to solve your problem is probably to kick me out.
I think that there's universal agreement.
I'm going to go wash my mouth out with soap now that I gave out these such a I don't know about you.
Well, hopefully we're not coming to murder yet.
Oh my.
The extreme solution, of course, is murder. So we're well over time. We'll try to have a short business meeting. We'll stop the recording, if you will, now. Thank you all. I think it's been a very productive meeting. There's been some heat, but there's also some light. Often you can't get heat light unless you have a little bit of heat.
Thank you.